DogWorks Radio is sponsored by Alaska Dog Works. Check out their website at alaskadogworks.com. From DogWorks Radio Network, sponsored by Alaska Dog Works, professional canine training center in Anchorage, Alaska. This is the DogWorks Radio Show, committed to families and their dogs to build lifelong and fulfilling relationships. Visit our website at dogworksradio.com. DogWorks Radio is part of the one and only 24-hour internet radio network dedicated to dogs. Now, here are your hosts, Robert and Michelle Forto.
Hello and welcome, everybody. This is Robert Forto, and you're listening to DogWorks Radio here on KVRF 89.7 in the Mat-Su Valley. RadioFreePalmer.org is our live streaming site. You can find all of our episodes over on DogWorksRadio.com, and be sure to check us out on social media by searching DogWorks Radio. On today's show, we welcome Susannah Charleson, who is calling in from Dallas, Texas. She is a New York Times best-selling author of the books Scent of the Missing and The Possibility of Dogs. Susannah is also a dog trainer and trains search and rescue dogs, detection canines, service dogs, and more. Today we're going to talk about her brand new book, Where the Lost Dogs Go, a story of love, search, and the power of reunion.
Hello, Susannah. Thank you very much for joining us today here on DogWorks Radio. I am so happy to have you on the air today, and we're going to be talking about your new book, Where the Lost Dogs Go, a story of love, search, and the power of reunion. Thank you for joining us. Could you do us a favor and give us a quick little bio about yourself? Maybe tell our listeners who you are and what you're all about in your own words, please.
Sure. Well, obviously, my name is Susannah Charleson, and I came to the working dog really by accident. My very first dog that I ever had in my life, when I was 28, was given to me as a puppy by my husband, and he was a Shetland sheepdog, a very motivated, high-drive Shetland sheepdog who came to live with us in an apartment and showed us very, very quickly that he had a whole lot of herding instinct, especially when he would try to herd me if I moved furniture, and he'd try to herd it back into place. Or if we had dinner parties, he would try to herd all our guests in the living room into a circle as they stood around having cocktails before dinner. And I was intrigued with this whole notion of a dog that was really high drive to do something. I'm a pretty high drive person with a whole lot of goals. And I had already been working search, actually, for missing people and livestock, but I'd been working search from, anywhere from 1,000 to 6,000 feet above the ground as a pilot, as a search pilot, and overflew both natural and man-made catastrophes as part of the rescue and recovery and documentation effort of those catastrophes. And there was a point where those two things kind of conjoined, and the search work from an airplane and my fascination with a dog driven to do a job combined, and I became a support person on a canine search team in 2001, just right before 9/11. And the timing was absolutely right. I joined a canine team in just a very short amount of time, about 18 months, 2 years, qualified to train a dog of my own. And that search dog, a golden retriever named Puzzle, who is the subject of my very first book and is a very strong player in this one as well, she would change my life. Working with her and the partnership with her and the good we were able to do and the challenges we faced changed me in ways I don't think they may be incomparable to any other experience I ever had. And so, she came into my life in 2004. I joined the team in 2001. And from there, I've been working with a whole series of partners in various contexts, searching for missing persons, as well as now searching for missing animals, and then also training dogs to serve people with various disabilities, both mobility and mental health disabilities, training dogs to help them mitigate the effects of particular episodes. So yeah, it's been a long road. I earned teaching credentials. I'm a CPDTKA, as they say, but I also earned credentials as a search and rescue dog trainer and a service dog trainer as well. So along the way, it's been a whole lot of schooling in both formal education and behaviorism and ethology and those kinds of things, but also, of course, the immense education afforded by every single dog that I have been lucky enough to work with.
Well, Susannah, you're speaking my language for sure. It's very similar story to mine on how I just kind of fell into it, and it just took off from there in terms of education and working with various dogs as the career grew. You had mentioned that you work with service dogs and comfort dogs and for displaced people and all of that. How did that transition happen from? It's a very different world from sort of that search and rescue, kind of emergency on the ground, tactical type stuff, to that more therapy type of training, where you're working one-on-one with a person versus, as you'd mentioned, with a team.
Right. Well, it actually came about, search and rescue really would lead me to that, and it's the subject of my second book, The Possibility Dogs. Many of our single victim searches with a search team are for people who have either out of fear or confusion left their homes unable to make their way back, or too scared to try to make their way back, or disoriented. And so I searched for plenty of Alzheimer's patients and people with various forms of storm-driven anxiety, very like we have a storm-phobic dog that is inclined to run. Well, people, that thunder mounts and the barometric pressure drops, and there are people who are made very anxious about that as well. And we searched for a number of children on the spectrum who were provoked by storm. And there was a point where I thought, and I met some dogs who were trained to recognize and mitigate those escalating anxieties. And I became very interested in training dogs who could prevent the person wandering before it ever happened, or alert, a fellow family member that there was trouble on the brew, if you will, in much the same way that dogs are trained to alert for, an incipient seizure, or a seizure that's in progress, or a blood sugar drop for a diabetic. I knew those dogs existed, and I saw some of them in the field, meeting them through the various families we worked with, et cetera, and in community events. And so I really became interested in not only the dogs to find the lost, but the dogs to help prevent some of our single victims, our single wanderers from wandering in the first place. And then the other side of it, on the comfort dog level, there were plenty of disasters where the search dogs would go out and come back in, and everyone when they're hurting, or the majority of people when they're hurting, responders and those affected alike, gravitate to dogs. I mean, I think I mentioned once that people hover around them the way we would come to a fire and put our hands out to a fire to comfort ourselves. And often, our search dogs are always good citizens, and they're trained to engage with the public and to be kindly and respond. But the search dogs coming out of the field need rest. They need time away. They need to be able to decompress. They need sleep often, because they're going to go back out in another sector, in an hour and a half, maybe even less. And so I became very interested in the very special kinds of dogs that are brought in often on the fringes or the periphery of disasters, and their good presence and their engagement really helps both the responders and the people affected by the catastrophe to have a comforting presence that is exclusively canine. And you're a dog person, and I'm sure your listeners are as well, and know that there is a special brand of solace that only a beautiful animal can provide.
Talking about the pure essence of working dogs there, as you describe it, it just gives me chills down my back of just that whole process that you had gone through, in particular with natural disasters and all of that. Just one more point on the dog training side, Susannah. I had never put it together like you had just said, where the folks that are often lost for some type of psychological reason, as you mentioned, Alzheimer's patients and all of that. I always thought about folks being lost to just sort of traveling off trail and losing their way, as they speak. But when you put it in kind of a psychological perspective, that really makes a lot of sense.
Well, yes, and there are plenty of trail wanderers for sure. Now, interestingly, what we find is that as technology gets better, and now keep in mind, I'm outside an urban area now, and we do have plenty of wilderness searching, sometimes hugging the urban area, but so much of the searching I do is actually urban wilderness, if you will. And so we don't have people here where I am who are wandering off trail as often as you might in New Mexico or Colorado or Oregon, for instance. And we do have a pretty extensive senior population often that lives at home with family or in group homes with caregivers, et cetera. And I don't know if you have heard anything of the weather we've had here in Texas this spring, but the spring and summer, we just had a mighty wave of really, really vicious storms. And as a searcher, I know two things, and one of them is that we will have wanderer calls because people will bolt from the house in the middle of a storm or just ahead of it. And, of course, we're going to have a lot of panicked dogs that have scaled fences and taken off at top speed, across a cityscape because they're so scared. So yeah, we where I am, we have a whole lot of quite a number of searches that are provoked by mental health challenges and perceptual challenges, where they feel something and they don't understand it, but the motivation is run. And sometimes run blindly in the dark, in the rain, near flash flooding. So it's pretty critical stuff.
Wow, this could definitely be a show in of itself for sure, but I definitely want to transition over to your books and the newest book in particular, Where Lost Dogs Go. But it's my understanding that you've written 3 books, Scent of the Missing, and The Possibility of Dogs. And as we had spoken earlier in the show, you had mentioned some dogs' names, and one of them was Puzzle. Another dog that plays a big role into this is Ace. And before we jump into that, I have to talk about the dog that you talk about on your book cover, the dog named Rough Draft. That has to be a perfect tie-in to becoming an author. Can you tell us a little bit about that guy or gal?
Oh, little Rough Draft. Well, I'm not sure if you could hear him. We just had a lawn crew pass by outside the house, and he was barking at the opening of the show. So I'm not sure if you could hear him or not. Rough Draft, R-U-F-F Draft, is a dog, a little paralyzed dog actually, that I got about 18 months ago. He had blown a disc as a young dog, a year old, and his situation was complicated enough that his owner at the time felt like she was medically over her head in terms of how to care for him. And he entered the rescue system as an owner surrender. And I've got a fair amount of experience with senior and special needs dogs, so I brought him in. And he's a little dog on wheels. He is very, very speedy on wheels, and a very full little personality. He is a border collie crossed with a dachshund. So if you can imagine, I'm so sorry, I just said border collie, like a little bearded collie, crossed with a dachshund, crossed with a border terrier. So if you can imagine a little brindle bearded thing with a kind of a long body like a dachshund, which explains the blown disc situation. He's a cutie pie. We call him Duffy, Rough Draft McDuff. And he is full of personality, and he got on those little wheels and never looked back. So,
I absolutely love the name. What a cool kind of homage to your career as a writer. So, speaking of becoming a writer, it sounds like you were a very busy lady up to this point with the search work and, as you'd mentioned, all of the education components that come with becoming a dog trainer and all of this. Where did you find, first off, the passion to become a writer? And secondly, how did you know that you had this in you to be able to just sit down and crank out books? You know, that's a full-time job in of itself.
Well, it is. You're absolutely right. But I came to writing actually from my work as both a college professor and specifically a college professor of mass media and broadcasting. Before I did any of this, even before I learned to fly an airplane to put myself through graduate school, I wrote for broadcast. So my background was writing news and feature stories. And I hosted a television show for a while. I worked radio for years. So yes, but all of my material really was short form. So, I was really good at the 27-second news story and the 4.5-minute feature, and then I did quite a bit of essay work for print material. And Scent of the Missing, my very, very first book, started out as a collection of essays that I had written on working search and rescue, because my natural tendency was as a feature writer and as an essayist. And at one point I was at a book conference and was reading to the assembled attendees and the people who were doing the workshops. And one of the writers there was Lee Child, the thriller writer. And I had mentioned that I was going to try to sell these to maybe NPR or something. And he, after I read, he said to me, "Oh, this is your book." He said, "Sell to radio later." He said, "This is your book. Make this into a book and go, go, go." And I thought, well, okay, I'm not going to ignore recommendation from Lee Child, I don't think. I think his advice is probably good. And he has a really big background in media as well. And so I started the process of thinking less like an essayist and more like a long-form writer. And the first book, I think I ultimately wrote the first draft of the full through story of that first book. It took me about 18 months. And then I entered a competition, and it did very well in that competition, and an agent came forward and said, "I'd like to represent this." And then 3 months later, he sold it, and we were on our way. And that was the first book, and that took about 1.5 years, 2 years to come out. And then I've been just working systematically with that agent and with that publisher ever since. So yes, they have a very natural, organic evolution to what I'm doing in life, in the field beside dogs or elsewhere. But I will say that jump from thinking in terms of essays and short form and radio to the long form format, that was a challenging jump for me as a writer. Even though I adore reading, obviously books that are long form,
right.
Writing that way was challenging.
I have to say, I've only had the chance to read your newest book, but very compelling storyteller, very compelling writer. I really enjoyed sitting down and reading through Where the Lost Dogs Go, and I have to give you kudos. It's a very good book, and sort of the premise of this book, Susannah, is searching, obviously, for lost dogs. You had mentioned that 1 in 6 dogs go missing at some point in their lives. And as a dog trainer, and obviously speaking to another dog trainer, it is one of our primary jobs to teach owners how to be able to contain their dogs so they don't jump fences and they don't get lost, and they have, very good recall and all of that. But as you had mentioned, often it's natural disasters, fireworks, spookiness, something requires them to go missing. And your book is about going out and searching for these dogs in all sorts of situations. And you had also mentioned, Susannah, that your first book was sort of a collection of essays. And it sounds to me, as reading through this book, that this is sort of on the same path. It's sort of these stories about going after certain dogs. One time you had talked about your mom had called you and talked about, going out and searching for a dog, and it only take a few minutes, and that is never the case, is it?
Never. Yes. Yeah, for sure.
You had mentioned you had mentioned it's always days or possibly even weeks to go out and search for dogs this way, and that's so true, isn't it?
Yes, I think in all three of my books, essentially, you've got a through story, the long story that runs through the whole book, but cases themselves are fairly episodic. You go out on a search, whether you're searching for a missing person or a missing dog, and that absorbing work and that challenge becomes a real point of focus for. Sometimes you hope it's just a couple of hours. My search team once had a human find that took 15 minutes, and then boom, and that was brilliant. It was beautiful, and it was wonderful. And sometimes, we'll have a missing canine search or a missing cat search that we locate the animal in a really short amount of time. But sometimes these things will stretch across months, years, even. Human and animal searching, years even. And especially in the case of lost animals, I have to give so many props to the owners who keep the faith and keep trying out of a returned faithfulness to that animal, and who keep love waiting for an animal that, it may take 18 months, 2 years to come home. I cite that beautiful story of the golden in Vermont, Murphy, the golden in Vermont, and I want to give a shout out to Wilson Ring, the AP correspondent who also has written a short book, I think on Amazon, about that search. But Murphy was gone for, something like 559 days through one of the harshest winters Vermont has experienced in the last decade, and came home, and jumped on the couch like nothing had ever happened. But he had just barely survived. He really was in jeopardy for so much of that time, and so many people came forward to help him.
You hear all of those stories, on the news or on Facebook or whatever of these long-term searches, and of course some of them turn out, as you had mentioned, for a couple of years, and you'll hear about the cats or the dogs that got lost in Montana and somehow show up in Colorado, and all of that, all those amazing stories. And that is, I guess, my next transition. You had talked about writing for social media and radio and all of that, and I have to say, as a dog trainer, I think social media has done more for the searched pets, dogs in particular, at least in my understanding of them, has done more for this program than any other. Do you agree with that? It's just amazing how people come together these days.
Yes, you mean in terms of the capacity for getting a dog back? Is that what you're asking?
Somebody will say, "Hey." Right, like here locally, here in Alaska, we'll say, "Hey, one of my sled dogs got off the chain this morning, and he's loose." And the next thing you know, everybody's sharing it, and they find him 4 or 5 miles down the road, and it's just an amazing community that builds up around so many things. And I think that going after lost pets is just one of those that works really well on social media.
Yes, and I call it sometimes, the perfect hat trick in searching for missing animals. If you've got the combination of an owner and family and friends who are physically canvassing an area that an animal went missing and literally talking to everybody they pass, face to face, on foot, with a picture, talking to people. If you've got someone posting physical signs for people who are not on your social media or who are connected to different social media and thus miss your posts. So if you have physical signs in the area to get sightings, and then if you also have a strong social media presence, those three things make a terrific net. And I really think if a search starts pretty quickly and uses those three things immediately, within the first 24 hours, the probability of getting the animal home is just extraordinary. So I agree. I love having that, because before we were about foot canvassing and signs, and that was it. And we didn't have really the ability to have that lightning quick outreach that might go out as far as a spooked husky could run in a thunderstorm. And social media does have that quick level outreach.
So if we could, Susannah, we have just a few minutes left here on the show, and we're talking about, of course, your brand new book, Where the Lost Dogs Go. I want to ask you, and I know this is like asking a parent who their favorite child is, or a dog owner who their favorite dog is, but you have a lot of really cool stories about finding dogs and whatnot in your book. Do you have a favorite one, or one that really touches your heart the most in this book that you would like to share just kind of a quick overview of?
A favorite dog? Well, I think little Ace, who is really the star of the book, who came to me as a dog in a shelter the day before euthanasia, and someone put out a plea and said, can you please help him? I mean, they contacted me directly. This was a little dog who appeared to be a stray, but the minute I got him in the car and the minute I got him home, and you would understand this, he showed behaviors that demonstrated he had once been loved. He had once been loved. He had once been trained. He had once been cared for. His behaviors and his etiquette and his leash walking and his housebreaking were all extremely clear, and there was no sign that this was a dog that had been neglected or abused. This was a dog who had somehow through misadventure been lost for a long, long time. And his evolution in the story and my evolved understanding of what happened to him and how a loved dog could fall so far informed and has changed beyond the education I've received how I approach every missing pet case that comes my way. He's a resilient little figure. From what we believe now, even post-book, because I'm still putting out inquiries and trying to piece his life together, but we believe his owners are now deceased, and that is one of the ways he got lost. But his resilience and his innate willingness to heal and then to serve, to use his nose and help me recover other lost animals. He's a beautiful little dog, and I feel really, really fortunate that we were able to bring him in, and he's a little life changer.
What a cool story, and I love hearing the stories of how dogs touch our lives. That's the reason I do this show every week, because there are just so many people out there with so many great stories, and I had no idea when I was sent the advanced copy of your book, and just how much work that you have done in the world of dogs, and it's just amazing to hear people's adventures. And I just want to say thank you very much for what you do with the search work, and of course sharing your words on the page with your books. I am just so glad that you're on our show today.
Well, thank you so much for having me, and thank you for what you do as well.
Well, thank you. On behalf of my guest today, Susannah Charleson, and her book, Where the Lost Dogs Go, a story of love, search, and the power of reunion. Check it out. We're going to put some links on her show notes page of where you can purchase the book and visit her website and all of that. Susannah, it's a pleasure, and I hope to talk again soon, okay?
Thanks so much, Robert.
Thank you. With that, guys, we'll see you guys next time. Goodbye.
Did you know that Alaska Dog Works trains service dogs for those in need throughout North America? Each and every service dog that is trained through the Lead Dog Service Dog Program and Michelle Forto and her team has an individual training plan. We train for autistic, mobility, psychiatric, and PTSD for our soldiers for service work. If you know of someone that may need a service dog, please take a moment and check out Alaska Dog Works on social media and at alaskadogworks.com.